The airplane flew high in the sky, way up at 30,000 feet. It made a soft humming sound as it moved through the clouds. The flight was going from Los Angeles to Tokyo. Everything was calm and quiet in first class. The seats were big and comfy. Business people were drinking sparkly drinks and listening to soft, happy music. In the second row sat a man named Steven Seagal. He wore dark sunglasses and a black suit. He looked cool and calm, like someone who didn't need to show off. He wasn't talking to anyone. He just wanted a peaceful flight with no problems. Steven was on his way to Tokyo for a special event. It was a big party to honor martial arts masters, people who are really good at fighting and being peaceful. Steven was invited as a special guest. He hoped he could rest during the flight. No fans, no reporters, and no fights. But sadly, trouble had just walked onto the plane. From the back of the plane, loud footsteps were heard. Thud, thud, thud. A big man came through the curtain. He was very tall, with big muscles and a bald head. He wore a leather vest over a Metallica t-shirt. He looked like a tough biker who didn't belong in first class. He was not happy. "I paid for an aisle seat," the man yelled, pointing at the flight attendant. "I'm not sitting next to someone who snores in coach." The flight attendant stayed calm. "Sir, the plane is full. We can't just move people to first class." "I don't care," the man shouted. He pointed at the empty seat next to Steven Seagal. "That seat is empty. I'm sitting there." Steven looked up at the man for a second, then looked back at his screen. He didn't say anything. "Sir," the flight attendant said again, "you are not allowed to sit in first class." But the big man didn't listen. He pushed past the curtain, dropped his bag into the overhead bin with a loud thud, and stood in front of Steven. "Move," he growled. Steven didn't even blink. He said in a quiet voice, "You're in the wrong section." The man smirked and leaned in close. "And you're in my way." The flight attendant looked nervous. "Sir, you can't be here. I'm calling the airport security." The big man didn't stop. He shoved Steven's tray, and Steven's cup of water spilled. The glass rolled onto the floor. That was mistake number one. Then the man touched Steven's shoulder and gave it a little shove. That was mistake number two. Steven slowly took off his sunglasses. He looked at the man with cold, calm eyes. "Walk away," Steven said. His voice was deep and rough like rocks. The man laughed. "Oh yeah, what are you going to do, old man?" Other passengers started recording with their phones. Someone whispered, "Is that Steven Seagal?" The big man didn't care. "You think you're tough?" he shouted. "You watch too many movies, Grandpa." Then came mistake number three. The man threw a punch at Steven's face. But the punch didn't land. Steven's hand moved fast like lightning. He caught the man's fist in midair. It was like a bear trap grabbing a stick. The man's eyes got really big. He was surprised. Steven twisted the man's arm and stood up. He moved so smoothly it looked like dancing. The man bent over, groaning in pain. Everything went quiet in the cabin. Then wham! Steven gently slammed the man's head into the seat in front of them. Not too hard, just enough to make him dizzy. The man dropped to one knee groaning. "I warned you," Steven said. The flight attendant gasped. "Sir, sir." Steven raised his hand kindly. "He'll be fine." The man got back up, wiping blood from his nose. "You're dead. You're so dead," he said angrily. He stormed back down the aisle, shouting, "You don't know who I am." Steven calmly sat back down. He put up his tray, picked up a napkin, and wiped up the spilled water. A lady sitting nearby leaned over and whispered, "That was amazing." Steven gave her a small nod. Some people need to be reminded. But the trouble wasn't over yet. Steven noticed something. That man wasn't alone. 5 minutes later, the angry man came back. But this time, he brought 2 more men with him. They all had matching jackets with the same scary symbol sewn on them. It looked like a gang sign. One man was cracking his knuckles. The other was putting on black gloves. The passengers in first class looked scared. Everyone was quiet. The airplane captain spoke over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, please stay in your seats." Too late. The gang leader pointed at Steven. "You made the biggest mistake of your life," he shouted. Steven stood up again. He looked the same, calm, cool, and not afraid at all. "This is your crew?" Steven asked. "Yeah," the gang leader said. "They don't like when someone messes with their brother." Steven looked at all 3 men, quickly studying how they stood and moved. He knew where they were weak. "Then they're about to get even more embarrassed," Steven said. The cabin lights dimmed a little because of turbulence. The plane shook just a bit, but the real shaking was about to begin, in first class. The three men stood in the aisle like angry wolves, ready to fight a lion. Steven stood still, one hand resting on his seat's headrest. He didn't yell. He didn't show off. He just looked at them with steady eyes. His eyes said everything. You've already lost. You just don't know it yet. The first man ran at Steven. He was tall, had tattoos, and lots of energy. He tried to tackle Steven like a football player. Bad idea. Steven stepped to the side, grabbed the back of the man's jacket, and helped him fly face first into the bathroom door. Thud! The man fell down with a groan and slid to the floor like a dropped potato. The second man looked scared. Steven gave him a sharp look. Don't, Steven said calmly. You'll regret it. But the man didn't listen. He swung his fist fast at Steven's face. Steven ducked, hit the man in the ribs with his elbow, then kicked his legs out from under him. Boom! The man hit the floor hard. Now two of the bad guys were down. Only the leader was left, the one who started all the trouble. He backed away with his hands up a little. He wasn't so brave now. Okay, the leader said softly. I didn't know who you were. Steven stepped forward. You didn't care who I was. That's the problem. People gasped. Steven suddenly grabbed the man's vest, pulled him forward and bam, hit him in the stomach with his knee. The man bent over, gasping. Go sit down, Steven said in a cold voice. I can't breathe, the man wheezed. Then sit down and think about that, Steven said, before you try to take someone else's air. Steven let go. The man fell back, holding his belly. Flight attendants came running with handcuffs. Mr. Seagal, are you okay? One of them asked. I'm fine, Steven said. They're not. We're calling the Japanese police. They'll be arrested when we land, said the flight attendant. Good, Steven nodded. Make sure they sit far away from me. The people in the cabin were shocked. One man whispered, he didn't even sweat. A woman said, that's Steven Seagal. I thought he was just someone who looked like him. Nope, said another man holding his phone, recording everything. That's the real deal. And those guys just learned the hard way. Steven sat back down and adjusted his armrest. He looked calm, like nothing had happened. But deep inside, Steven knew this wasn't the end. He had seen the tattoos. He had seen the gang signs. More trouble might be waiting in Tokyo. But for now, Steven closed his eyes and finally enjoyed a moment of peace. Up in the sky, with the whole cabin quiet again. And even though the flight still had hours to go, no one dared mess with Steven Seagal again. Steven Seagal was sitting on an airplane. He was flying high in the sky with lots of other people. At first, everything seemed normal. People were sitting in their seats, flight attendants were walking around, and the engines made a soft humming sound. But Steven knew something was wrong. Some men on the plane didn't look like regular passengers. They were big, mean-looking, and had scary eyes. These men were part of a group called the Blackwires MC, a very bad biker gang. People said they did dangerous things like smuggling and hurting people. Steven thought to himself, if those three bad men were working together, then this isn't just a normal problem. This is a test. They're checking to see if they can take over the plane. Steven knew that when you hurt one part of a snake, the rest of the snake comes after you. That's how these kinds of people worked. 20 minutes passed. The plane was quiet again. The flight attendants brought drinks to the passengers. Everyone seemed calm, even though they were still a little nervous. Steven sat in his seat with his eyes closed. But he wasn't sleeping. His mind was awake, like a tiger watching everything. Then he felt it. Someone was near. Someone new. Steven opened his eyes. There was a man sitting 2 rows in front of him. Steven was sure this man hadn't been there before. He wore plain clothes, not a uniform, and he didn't have a drink or a snack. He just sat there, pretending to look at his phone. But Steven could see it. The man was using the shiny screen of his phone to secretly watch him. Steven noticed right away. This guy might be the boss, he thought. The man stood up slowly. He walked down the aisle like he was going somewhere normal. But then he stopped beside the first bad guy, the one Steven had already knocked out. The man knelt beside the thug and checked his pulse. Then he whispered into something near his collar. It was a microphone. He was talking to someone. This man wasn't just another biker. He was part of something bigger, something more serious. Steven quietly unbuckled his seatbelt again. A flight attendant leaned toward him. Sir, is everything all right? She asked. Steven didn't answer. He was already getting up. He walked toward the back of first class, to where the unconscious bad guy had been placed. But when Steven got there, the man was gone. The lavatory door was open. Inside, there was only a smear of blood on the wall. Steven stood still in the narrow hallway. He looked at the empty space where the bad guy had been. Then he looked around. The plane shook a little. Not from weather or wind, but from something else, something dangerous. The man in plain clothes, the one who had checked the thug's pulse, was gone too. His seat was empty. He had vanished like a ghost. Steven's eyes narrowed. These guys don't work alone, he thought. They always come in groups. When one of them is hurt, the rest come to help, like vultures circling around. Steven walked back to his seat. He didn't rush. He moved quietly, looking around as he walked. His right hand touched the back of every seat. His left hand was near the inside of his jacket, where he kept a tiny blade that looked like a pen. Not that he needed it. His fists were weapons, too. In row 4, Steven saw 2 more men. They looked strange. They were sitting up straight with sunglasses on. They had no drinks, no snacks, just big coats that looked funny around their ribs, like they were hiding something. Steven walked past them. They didn't look at him, but he saw their fingers twitch. More bad guys, he thought. This isn't just random anymore. This is planned. A big plan. He got back to his seat, just as the captain spoke through the speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent into Tokyo shortly. Please return to your seats and fasten your seat belts. Cabin crew, prepare for landing. Steven sat down, but he didn't put on his seatbelt. Not yet. 5 minutes passed. Then it started. The 2 bad guys in row 4 stood up quickly, even though the plane was getting ready to land. One of them walked toward the cockpit. The other one came straight toward Steven. A flight attendant tried to stop him. Sir, we're landing now. Please go back to your... The man pushed her away and pulled something from inside his coat. It wasn't a gun. It was a metal baton. He raised the baton and swung it down, aiming for Steven's head. But Steven was faster. He lifted his arm and blocked the baton with his forearm. Crack! It hurt, but Steven was strong. He grabbed the man's coat and smashed his forehead into the thug's face. Smash! Blood sprayed in the air. The thug fell down like a stone. The second man rushed in from behind, baton ready. Steven turned quickly. He caught the baton in the air and twisted the man's arm behind his back. Crack! Then he pushed the man hard into the cabin door. Bang! Now both thugs were down. One was hanging over a row of seats. The other was in a crumpled heap near the emergency exit. The passengers screamed. Some were scared. Some clapped and cheered. The pilot's voice came again from the speaker. Cabin crew, what's happening back there? Steven picked up the baton and tossed it to the stewardess. She caught it with shaking hands. 2 more down, Steven said calmly. Lock them up. The stewardess quickly followed his orders. Steven walked to the front of the plane, toward the cockpit. If there were more bad guys, he was going to find them. But just before he reached the cockpit, the door opened. The pilot stood there. He looked scared. Sweat dripped from his face. He looked pale. Behind him, in the tiny cockpit, was the man from before, the one with the microphone. The one who had vanished. He had the co-pilot in a headlock. One hand held a sharp piece of broken glass from a whiskey glass. It sparkled in the light. This plane is landing the way I say, the man said angrily. Unless your hero wants the cockpit full of blood. Steven didn't blink. He stepped forward, hands raised. Let the kid go, he said calmly. The man laughed. Not a chance. You messed with the wrong crew. This was supposed to be a secret mission. But now, he pressed the glass tighter to the co-pilot's neck. Now I'm going to show everyone that you're not so tough. Steven didn't say anything. He looked at the co-pilot's belt. There was a spare earpiece hanging there. The wire was long and close to the bad guy's leg. Steven leaned a little to the side. Are you sure you want to do this? He asked. The bad guy sneered. You're not walking off this plane. None of you are. Steven smiled. That's funny. Then he moved. Fast as lightning. Sharp as a blade. He ducked to the left, grabbed the earpiece wire, and yanked it up between the bad guy's legs. Yank! The man shouted in pain, falling backward. The co-pilot dropped low and rolled out of the way. Steven grabbed the bad guy by the neck and slammed his face into the control panel. Once. Twice. Blood splattered across the controls. The man fell down out cold. Clear, Steven said, breathing evenly. The co-pilot jumped back into his seat. Thank you, he whispered. Steven nodded. Let's get this thing on the ground. 20 minutes later, the plane landed safely in Tokyo. Police cars were already waiting outside. The wheels touched the runway, and the airport police rushed in. They ran onto the plane and handcuffed all the bad guys. The ones Steven had knocked out were taken away on stretchers. Steven stood at the front of the plane with his arms folded. A police officer came up to him. "Mr. Seagal, we're very sorry. We didn't know they were going to do this." Steven shrugged. "They wanted a fight," he said. The officer looked around at all the knocked out bad guys. "Well," he said, "they got one." Later that day, the whole world heard the news. Steven Seagal stops hijackers on Tokyo plane. Bad guys tried to take over planes, but picked the wrong hero. Steven Seagal still has it. People everywhere were talking about him. Back in his hotel room, Steven finally sat down. He poured himself a warm cup of green tea. He looked out the window at the tall buildings of Tokyo. The city lights sparkled like stars. He smiled just a little. Some men wore superhero capes. Steven didn't need one. He wore silence and steel fists. What did you think of the story? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let's chat. If you enjoyed the journey, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss the next adventure. Thanks for being part of this one. And until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and keep exploring the unknown.